The wind across the Giza Plateau carries nothing but time and dust. It moves without sound over limestone bedrock that has borne witness to more dawns than our histories have recorded. In the low light before the moon rises, the great structures are not monuments. They are presences, geological in their scale and silence. They do not announce themselves, they simply are. And in their being, they impose a question that the landscape itself seems unwilling to answer. We are taught to stand before them and feel awe. But perhaps the first duty is not to feel, but to listen. To listen to the deep quiet that surrounds them. A quiet that has held its place for thousands of years, waiting for a different kind of observer to arrive in the dark and simply watch the stars pivot around a stone apex. Inside a relieving chamber, high above the central passage, there is a rough daub of red ochre paint on a ceiling block. It is a quarry mark applied hastily by a work gang 4.5 millennia ago. The inscription is catalogued, documented. The Cartouche of Khufu, second king of the 4th dynasty. This is our anchor, our point of certainty in the shifting sands of the past. Colonel Weiss's men found it in 1837, blasting their way into the sealed chambers with gunpowder. It is accepted as the definitive proof of ownership, the builder's signature on his creation. The mark grounds the pyramid in a specific reign, a specific dynasty, a specific and understandable moment in the Bronze Age. It is a human mark, crude and hurried, on a project of inhuman scale. It is the official story written in stone and pigment. But the block that bears this hurried mark tells a different story. It is a 50-ton piece of granite, hewn from the quarries at Aswan, hundreds of miles to the south, and raised nearly 200 feet into the air. Observe its edges. They are true. Its surface, though rough, is part of a cohesive, impossibly precise whole. The joints between it and its neighbors are finer than a sheet of paper. This is the first disturbance, the quiet contradiction. The casual, almost careless nature of the human signature, painted upon a work of sublime and meticulous engineering that seems to belong to a different order of thought entirely. The hand that painted the mark and the mind that designed the placement of the stone seem to be separated by more than just social strata. They seem separated by an entire paradigm of knowledge. This precision is not an anomaly. It is the rule. The entire structure is a testament to it. The base of the Great Pyramid, covering 13 acres, is leveled to within less than an inch. Its 4 sides are aligned to the cardinal points of the compass with an accuracy that would be a challenge for modern surveyors using satellite technology. The mean error is less than 3 arc minutes from true north. This is not the product of a craftsman's lucky guess or a generation of trial and error. This is the result of a system of measurement, of astronomy, of engineering, applied with a consistency and mastery that appears fully formed, without precedent in the archaeological record. It is a cold, mathematical fact embedded in millions of tons of stone, a silent monument to a level of understanding that simply should not have existed then. We should pause here, under the same stars that guided those ancient surveyors. The constellation of Orion, which some say is mirrored in the layout of the pyramids below, wheels across the sky. The air grows colder. It is in these moments of stillness that the true weight of the place can be felt. Not the weight of the stone, but the weight of the intelligence required to shape it. It is an intelligence that understood the precise dimensions of the planet, the length of the year, the nature of celestial mechanics. It is an intelligence that left behind its answer, but took with it the memory of how it first came to ask the question. The wind is the only thing that moves. Everything else, the sand, the stones, the stars, is held in a state of suspended inquiry. From a different kind of record, a papyrus scroll found near the Red Sea, we meet the scribe. His name was Merer, an inspector who led a team of 40 men. His logbook, the oldest papyrus document ever discovered, details his work during the 27th year of Khufu's reign. He writes of logistics, Of administration. He details trips from the Tura quarries, carrying fine white limestone casing stones for the pyramid. He records the distribution of bread and beer to his crew. He notes the canals and harbors they constructed to bring the boats closer to the plateau. His account is meticulous, administrative, and profoundly mundane. It is the perfect portrait of a well-organized state bureaucracy, capable of managing a massive workforce and a complex supply chain with remarkable efficiency. The scribe recorded everything necessary to keep the project moving. And yet, this is where the silence begins. Merer, the administrator, is thorough. The Egyptian state as a whole was pathologically thorough. They recorded grain yields, tax collections, religious rituals, dynastic lineages, and medical procedures. Their scribal culture was the foundation of their civilization, a vast and detailed archive of their world. But in all of this surviving documentation, a void. There are no architectural plans for the Great Pyramid, no engineering calculations, no mathematical formulas, no explanation of the tools or methods used to quarry, transport, and lift multi-ton blocks with such precision. A civilization that documented the daily bread rations for its workers left no record of how it accomplished the single greatest engineering feat of the ancient world. The silence is too complete to be an accident of preservation. This absence is not a gap in our knowledge. It feels like a feature of the original design. It suggests that the knowledge required for the pyramid's construction was not native to the administrative class that organized its labor. The pharaohs of the Fourth Dynasty were perhaps not the architects, but the inheritors. The powerful custodians of a pre-existing template, a sacred inheritance of knowledge so complete and so profound that their only task was to execute it. The scribe did not record the blueprint because it was not his to record. It was a given, a sacred text written not on papyrus, but in the language of mathematics, astronomy, and stone. He was managing a construction project, not a research and development initiative. The genius was already ancient by the time his first shipment of stone arrived. Look again at the structure against the night sky. It seems less a tomb now, and more a repository, a device built to preserve a set of numbers and alignments with an almost fanatical dedication. It is a message encoded in a medium designed to resist the erosion of deep time. The names of the pharaohs may be attached to it, like the quarry mark on the granite block, but the intelligence that shaped its core seems to speak from a much deeper past, a past for which we have no other records. The stones do not speak of Khufu. They speak of the constant of pi. They speak of the circumference of the earth. They speak of the precession of the equinoxes. They hold a memory that predates the civilization we credit with its creation. Some will look upon this and see only the work of a powerful king, a monument to a man's ambition. That is the simpler story, and perhaps the more comfortable one. But for those who have remained here, in the quiet of this observation, the presence of a deeper question is undeniable. It is a feeling that we are standing on the edge of a profound civilizational amnesia, and that this structure is the last, and perhaps only, clue we have been given. The night is deep, and the inquiry has only just begun. We turn now from the language of stone to the language of the scribe. In the quiet of an archive, far from the wind of the plateau, lies a different kind of monument, one written on the fragile fibers of a river reed. The document is known as the Turin King List. It is not a story or a poem. It is a ledger, a tax document of time itself, written in hieratic script around the reign of Ramesses II, yet it claims to copy sources far older. It is damaged, fragmented into more than 160 pieces, a puzzle of administrative memory. Its purpose was not to inspire, but to catalogue. It lists the rulers of Egypt, the length of their reigns and their lifespans, column by column, with the dispassionate precision of a bookkeeper. It is an artifact of a bureaucracy obsessed with continuity, with the unbroken chain of command stretching back to the very origin of order. the scribe who composed this list, worked with a steady hand. We can see it in the ruled lines, the consistent spacing, the neat columns that organize the flow of power from one reign to the next. The early sections are what we expect. They list the pharaohs of the historical dynasties, their names and reign lengths aligning, more or less, with what archaeology has confirmed. We see names we recognize from the stone monuments: Djoser, Sneferu, Khufu. The numbers are plausible, human scale. A reign of 23 years. A reign of 24 years. The entries are brief, factual, and repetitive. Name, duration, name, duration. It is the rhythm of official record-keeping, a sound that echoes through the administrative offices of any organized state, ancient or modern. The list grounds itself in a reality we can measure and understand. It establishes its own credibility through its orderliness. But as we trace the columns back, moving deeper into the document and deeper into the past it purports to record, the rhythm remains the same, but the content begins to shift. The scribe's hand does not falter. The ink flows with the same measured consistency. Yet the nature of the rulers changes. Before the first mortal king, Menes, who unified the two lands, the list records a different category of ruler. The scribe gives them no special introduction. He simply continues his list. He records a group of beings identified as the Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus. The papyrus notes that this group reigned for 13,420 years. The number is written with the same administrative finality as a reign of 23 years. It is not presented as myth. It is presented as a preceding dynastic period, an entry in the ledger of the state, and before them, another list, a dynasty of gods. The scribe does not use the flowery language of mythology here. He does not recount their deeds or their battles. He simply lists their names and the duration of their rule, as if they were the heads of a prior administration. The record is damaged here, the papyrus crumbling at the crucial lines, but the legible fragments are unsettling in their specificity. The god Geb is recorded as having ruled for a period, the god Osiris, the god Set, then the god Horus. The scribe notes their time on the throne. The final entry in this divine dynasty is followed by a summary, a total for the reigns of these gods. The number, though partly lost, is calculated to have been over 23,000 years, 200 years to be precise, before the followers of Horus even began their own tenure. The air in this archival space seems to grow still. We are not reading an epic. We are auditing a ledger. The scribe's task was to compile, to transmit a record he believed to be true and complete. The impossible numbers are not embellished. They are not explained. They are simply stated, entered into the official timeline of the kingdom. This is the core of the disturbance. A mythology would speak of cosmic battles and the creation of the world. A state record speaks of succession and duration. The Turin Papyrus does the latter, using the cold, spare language of bureaucracy to describe a timescale that defies our understanding of history, of civilization, of human existence itself. The scribe was not a poet. He was a civil servant, and his report contains entries that are quietly and profoundly impossible. This is not an isolated case. Other sources, though fragmentary, echo this strange, deep chronology. The historian Manetho, an Egyptian priest writing in the 3rd century BCE, had access to temple records that no longer exist. His history, now preserved only in the quotations of later chroniclers, repeats the same pattern. He lists the familiar 30 dynasties of mortal pharaohs, the ones known to archaeology. But before them, he too records a long period of rule by gods and demigods, assigning them reigns that span thousands of years. He presents it not as a preamble of myth, but as Dynasties 0 and 00, a direct, chronological prequel to the reigns of men. For Manetho, as for the scribe of the Turin Papyrus, Egyptian history did not begin with the first pharaoh. It began in a preceding epoch of immense duration. Consider the Palermo stone, another of the oldest surviving records. It is a stele of black basalt, inscribed on both sides with the annals of the kings of the first 5 dynasties. For each year of a king's reign, it notes the most important event: a religious festival, the creation of a statue, a military campaign. And it records the height of the Nile inundation for that year, measured in cubits, palms, and fingers. It is an intensely practical year-by-year account of the kingdom's life. But the top register of the stone, the section that would precede the first dynasty, lists the names of kings from a much earlier time. These are the pre-dynastic rulers of Lower Egypt, figures for whom we have no other monumental record. The stone treats them as historical. It suggests a settled, organized kingship long before the official date for its emergence. The record-keepers of ancient Egypt were preserving a memory of their own past that was fundamentally different from the one we have constructed for them. For them, the time of Khufu was not the dawn of their great works, but a period deep within an already ancient timeline. Their civilization had a memory of a different scale of time, a memory that survived not in grand myths, but in the driest of places, in their administrative lists, in their chronological records, in their year-to-year annals. The scribe, in his meticulous copying, was performing an act of preservation. He was carrying forward a set of data that, to him, represented the unbroken chain of history. The fact that this data included impossibly long reigns was not a reason to discard it. It was simply part of the record he had inherited. Perhaps this is a good moment to pause, to let the silence of the room settle. Note the time on the clock before you. Note the quality of the light in your own space. This present moment, measured and precise, is the only ground we have. From here, we look back at these numbers: 23, 200 years, 13, 420 years, and they appear as aberrations, as mistakes in the record. But for the scribe, they were not a mistake. They were the foundation. If you are so inclined, make a simple note of this moment in the comments below. The time, the place. A small personal record of an encounter with a much larger one. It is a way of marking the distance, of acknowledging the immense, silent gap between their accounting of time and our own. The implications of this administrative memory are profound. It suggests that the knowledge base of the dynastic Egyptians, their theology, their astronomy, their statecraft, was not something they invented from scratch. It was an inheritance. They saw themselves not as founders, but as the heirs to a legacy of order, or Ma'at, that was established long before the first human pharaoh. The gods and the Shemsu Hor were not just characters in creation stories. They were the prior administrations whose reigns were a matter of official, albeit incomprehensible, record. This frames the achievements of the Old Kingdom in a new light. They were not pioneers venturing into the unknown. They were restorers, attempting to live up to a standard that had been set in a far distant past. Look again at the scribe's work. The papyrus is a physical object. It can be touched. The ink is a chemical substance, carbon black and gum. The script is a known language. Everything about the medium is concrete, physical, and human. And yet, the message it carries points to a history that seems to dissolve into the inhuman scale of geology or astronomy. This is the central tension. The record is presented with the mundane authority of a clerk, yet its contents are as alien as a transmission from another world. The scribe makes no attempt to bridge this gap. He simply records the data as it was given to him, leaving us to confront the contradiction alone in the quiet of the archive. The document does not ask for belief. It simply presents its ledger for inspection. This pattern of immense, technologically unsupported antiquity appears in other contexts, always delivered with the same dispassionate tone. The inventory stele, discovered at Giza in the 19th century, purports to be a record by Khufu himself. In it, the king states that he did not build the Great Sphinx, but rather found it in a state of disrepair, along with the Temple of Isis, which he then ordered restored. The stele claims these structures were already ancient in his time, legacies of a prior age. While most mainstream Egyptologists date the stele to a much later period, dismissing it as a pious forgery, it raises a crucial question. Why would a later dynasty invent a fiction that diminishes the glory of Khufu, the builder of the greatest pyramid, by making him a mere custodian of even older monuments? The text does not aggrandize Khufu. It places him within a lineage of caretakers. It describes him finding the Sphinx damaged by a lightning strike, its divine sycamore tree shattered. His role is one of discovery and restoration, not of creation. The language is again administrative, detailing the inventory of the temple and the actions taken to repair it. Whether it is a true record of the Fourth Dynasty or a later composition, it reflects a persistent Egyptian tradition, the belief that the sacred sites on the plateau were far older than the historical pharaohs associated with them. It is another data point suggesting that the dynastic Egyptians saw themselves as latecomers to their own sacred landscape, tasked with maintaining structures whose origins were already lost to a deep and revered antiquity. We see a similar pattern in the temple inscriptions at Dendera. The beautifully preserved Ptolemaic temple we see today contains inscriptions stating that it was built according to plans from a much earlier time. The texts claim the original drawings were found on an ancient goatskin scroll dating back to the time of the followers of Horus. Here again is that same term from the Turin Papyrus, the Shem-Su-Hor. Here again is the same concept. The historical builders are not the architects. They are the faithful executors of an ancient blueprint, a sacred inheritance. The act of building is an act of restoration, of bringing back into being a form that was designed in a remote, foundational past. The credit is given not to the current ruler, but to the primeval source of the knowledge. The scribe of Dendera, like the scribe of the Turin Papyrus, is not boasting of his era's originality. He is legitimizing his work by tying it to the immense authority of the past. The value was not in innovation, but in perfect replication. This idea is profoundly counterintuitive to our modern mindset, which prizes novelty and progress. For the ancient Egyptian consciousness, perfection was not something to be achieved in the future. It was something to be recovered from the past. The Golden Age was not ahead of them. It was thousands of years behind them. Their greatest technological and spiritual achievements were therefore seen as acts of remembering, not acts of invention. The blueprint was the sacred object, and the builders were its humble servants. This changes our perception of the archaeological record. Perhaps the lack of plans for the Great Pyramid is not an accident of preservation. Perhaps the plans were never drawn on papyrus because they were not a product of the scribal administrative class. The blueprint was of a different order. It may have been a set of mathematical and astronomical principles, a system of knowledge passed down through a closed lineage, a sacred trust from that earlier time recorded in the king lists. The scribe recorded the bread and beer, the movement of barges, the names of the work gangs, because that was his world. That was the contribution of the Fourth Dynasty state. But the celestial alignments, the geodetic placement, the mathematical constants embedded in the structure, that was the inheritance. The records, when read this way, cease to be myths. They become the surviving administrative traces of a vast civilizational handoff, a transfer of knowledge from one epoch to another. The impossible numbers in the king lists are not fictions. They may be the last, degraded memory of the true timescale of the original architects. The reigns of thousands of years might be a confused rendering of a vast, unrecorded history, a period of stable development so long that the later dynastic Egyptians could only interpret it as the reign of gods. The scribe, tasked with compiling a single unified history, simply stitched the two records together, placing the incomprehensible deep past at the beginning of the familiar, human-scale present. We are left holding these fragments, a piece of a king list here, a temple inscription there, a basalt stone with its columns of years. They are cold, administrative documents. They do not ask us to believe in gods who lived for millennia. They simply show us that the ancient Egyptians themselves did. Or rather, they show us that the state's official memory was structured around a deep chronology that dwarfed their own. They were a civilization living in the shadow of a far greater and perhaps far more knowledgeable past. The evidence is not in a single, spectacular revelation. It is in the repetitive, mundane, and deeply strange consistency of their own bookkeeping, a bookkeeping that diligently recorded an impossible history. The ledger is open, and the accounting does not balance. The inquiry can no longer be confined to the dust of a single plateau. The silence from the Egyptian scribe, so specific and so profound, compels us to listen for its echo elsewhere. If a body of knowledge as advanced as the Giza blueprint existed in deep antiquity, it is unlikely to have been the possession of a single, isolated culture. An inheritance of that magnitude would leave traces, fragments of its memory embedded in the foundational records of other civilizations. We must widen the search, moving from the banks of the Nile to the lands between the two rivers, Mesopotamia, where another great scribal tradition sought to catalog the totality of its own past. There, under a different sun, a similar administrative memory was being carved into wet clay, preserving a chronology that is at once familiar and deeply unsettling. In the archives of the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford rests a small clay prism, covered in tightly packed cuneiform script. It is the Weld Blundell prism, one of the most complete copies of the Sumerian king list. Like the Turin Papyrus, it is an administrative document, not an epic poem. Its purpose was to establish legitimacy, to create an unbroken chain of royal succession from the present ruler all the way back to the origin of kingship itself. The scribe who impressed these symbols into the clay was a bureaucrat, a record keeper concerned with order, lineage, and duration. He worked with a stylus and a list, his task one of compilation, not creation. The object itself is mundane, fired clay, a durable form of ancient paperwork. Its surface is cool to the touch, a ledger of time made solid. The early sections of the list are, like their Egyptian counterpart, recognizably historical. They name rulers of city-states like Kish, Uruk, and Ur, assigning them reign lengths that, while sometimes long, are within the realm of human possibility. We see names known from other texts and from archaeology, grounding the document in a shared reality. But as the scribe traces the lineage backward, past the names of familiar human kings, he crosses a threshold. He notes a great cataclysm, a flood that swept over the land. And before that flood, he records a dynasty of rulers whose reigns are of an entirely different order of magnitude. The scribe's stylus moves with the same dispassionate precision, but the numbers it records become impossible. He writes that Alulim, the first king, ruled from the city of Eridu for 800 years. His successor, Alalangar, ruled for 36, 0 years. The list continues, 8 kings in total, ruling from 5 different cities over a combined period of 200 years. Then, the scribe makes a simple administrative note. Then the flood swept over. After the flood, he writes, kingship was once again lowered from heaven, and the list resumes with rulers whose reigns are dramatically shorter, eventually settling into the familiar human scale. The structure of the memory is identical to the one preserved in Egypt. A foundational period of impossibly long-lived rulers, a great rupture or transition, and then the beginning of recorded human history. Two of the world's oldest civilizations, both obsessed with record-keeping, independently preserved the same improbable timeline for their own origins. The anomaly is no longer isolated. It is beginning to look like a pattern. A quiet observation is required here. Imagine a room, late at night, illuminated by a single desk lamp. On one side lies a photograph of the fragmented Turin Papyrus. On the other, a high-resolution image of the Sumerian clay prism. The scripts are entirely different, hieratic and cuneiform. The materials are unrelated, river reed and river clay. The civilizations were distinct, with their own gods, their own languages, their own histories. Yet, in their oldest state-sanctioned chronicles, the foundational structure of time itself is a mirror image. The quiet act of placing these two records side by side reveals a resonance that geography and history cannot easily explain. It is the first echo, a shared memory that survived the erosion of millennia in two separate, sealed archives. The work of the researcher is not to speculate, but to compare. The data points are laid out on the table. In Egypt, a pre-dynastic reign of gods and demigods totaling over 36,000 years. In Sumer, a pre-Diluvian reign of kings totaling over 241,000 years. In both cases, these periods are recorded not as myth, but as the preceding entries in a continuous, administrative list of rulers. In both cases, they are followed by a sharp reduction in lifespan and reign, marking the start of the current, human-dominated era. This is not a simple story of gods from a dream time. This is a structural signature, a specific chronological framework that both cultures considered to be the official, factual account of their own deep past. The pattern is too specific to be a coincidence of mythological archetypes. This shared framework suggests a common source, a memory so ancient that it became the bedrock upon which these later historical civilizations built their identity. The Great Flood of Sumerian record and the transition between the Shemsu-Hor and the First Dynasty in Egypt may be different cultural renderings of the same planetary event, a demarcation line in civilizational memory. For those who have chosen to remain with this inquiry, a certain kind of patience is required. Recognizing such patterns is not a sudden revelation. It is a slow process of accretion, of allowing the evidence to accumulate in the quiet. It asks only that we continue to look together as the scope of the investigation widens and the echoes grow louder, more insistent. The search now moves eastward, across the mountains of Iran and into the plains of the Indus Valley. Here, another of the world's great foundational cultures left behind a different kind of record, not of kings, but of time itself. The Vedic texts of ancient India speak of a cosmic chronology based on vast cycles called yugas. This is not a linear list of rulers, but a cyclical ledger of the ages of the world, a system of accounting for time on a planetary and even cosmic scale. The scribes of this tradition, the rishis, were not recording the reigns of men, but the quality and duration of entire epochs. Theirs was a work of cosmology, but it was presented with the mathematical precision of an astronomical almanac. The system describes 4 ages. The Satya Yuga, or Golden Age, is said to last 728 years, a period of perfect enlightenment and great longevity. It is followed by the Treta Yuga of 296 years, the Dvapara Yuga of 864 years, and finally our own era, the Kali Yuga, the shortest and darkest of the ages, lasting 432 years. The numbers themselves are staggering, built upon a sophisticated mathematical system. But beneath the scale, the conceptual pattern is familiar. The tradition holds a memory of a vast, primordial age of perfection, from which humanity has been in a state of steady, measured decline through successive, shorter epochs. It is the same downward trajectory seen in the records of Egypt and Sumer, a memory of a lost golden age, but expanded to a cosmological scale. This is not the history of a state, but the history of a world. Yet the underlying signature remains, a deep, impossibly remote past characterized by immense duration and a higher state of being, followed by a process of decay leading to the present, diminished age. The numbers differ, the cultural expression is unique, but the core concept, the memory of decline from a far greater beginning, is the same. It is a third, independent echo of the same foundational story. The pattern is no longer a simple bilateral resonance between Egypt and Sumer. It is becoming a harmonic that spans the ancient world, from the Mediterranean to the Indian subcontinent. The memory of a long-lost beginning seems to be a common inheritance of mankind. The researcher now turns from ancient texts to the silent language of the sky. He charts the slow, 9 and 20-year cycle known as the precession of the equinoxes, the gentle wobble of the Earth's axis as it spins. This grand celestial clock is one of the few natural phenomena that operates on a timescale comparable to the myths. Its movement shifts the position of the constellations over millennia, a slow, inexorable turning of the heavens. Many ancient cultures were aware of this cycle. They encoded its numbers in their myths and in their architecture. This celestial movement provided a framework for measuring deep time, a way of chronicling the ages of the world against the backdrop of the stars. It is a potential key, a natural rhythm that might underpin these shared, impossibly long chronologies. The pattern of knowledge, once sought in papyrus and clay, now appears written in stone and aligned to the stars. The great temple complex of Angkor Wat in Cambodia, for example, is a vast architectural diagram of Hindu cosmology, its causeways and towers encoding numbers related to the yuga cycles and the measurement of precession. The builders were not simply constructing a temple. They were creating a scale model of their cosmic timeline, a machine for remembering the great cycles of the ages. The knowledge was not just written down. It was built, turned into a physical, enduring reality. The memory of deep time was so important that it had to be preserved in a medium more lasting than any scroll, a medium of stone aligned to the slow turning of the cosmos itself. Now we must cross the last ocean, to a place utterly disconnected from the ancient world of Eurasia, the high Andes of South America. On the shores of Lake Titicaca, at an altitude of 13,000 feet, lie the ruins of Tiahuanaco, a site whose age is the subject of profound debate. In the early 20th century, the engineer Arthur Poznański conducted decades of surveys here. He was not a traditional archaeologist. He was a man who measured stones and alignments. He approached the ruins as an engineering problem, meticulously cataloging the placement of the megalithic blocks and the astronomical sightlines of the Kala Sasaya temple, a structure he identified as a solar observatory. His work was that of a surveyor, cold, methodical, and based entirely on measurement. Poznański's calculations led him to a conclusion that shattered the conventional timeline of the Americas. He observed that the temple was aligned to the solstice, but with a slight error. He hypothesized that the temple was perfectly aligned at the time of its construction, and that the discrepancy was the result of the change in the Earth's axial tilt, or obliquity, over many thousands of years. By calculating the rate of this change, he backdated the construction of the Kala Sasaya to approximately 15,000 BCE. The number, presented as the result of astronomical and engineering analysis, was an order of magnitude older than anything believed possible for a complex civilization in South America. It was another impossible number, derived not from a king list, but from the alignment of stones. Mainstream archaeology rejects this date, placing the height of Tiahuanaco's culture around 500 to 1000 CE, based on the conventional analysis of pottery and other cultural artifacts found at the site. This creates a stark and unresolved conflict. On one hand, the story told by the cultural layers, which points to a familiar human-scale history. On the other, the story told by the astronomical alignments of the primary architecture, which points to an antiquity so deep it seems impossible. Tiahuanaco becomes another data point in the global pattern, a site whose foundational elements seem to whisper of a much older and more knowledgeable origin than the later cultures that inhabited and repurposed them. The stones and the stars suggest one timeline. The pottery suggests another. The pattern is now unmistakable. From the king lists of Egypt and Sumer, to the cosmic cycles of India, to the stellar alignments of Cambodia and the Andean highlands, a consistent global signature emerges. It is a memory of a profound antiquity, of a lost golden age, of a cataclysmic rupture, and of a knowledge system that seems to be a shared inheritance. These are not isolated myths. They are the recurring, structural elements of the oldest records of our planet's most foundational civilizations. The echo is everywhere. The same story, dressed in different cultural languages, is being told by scribes and builders who were separated by impassable oceans and insurmountable gulfs of time. We are left in a silent room, the desk now covered with maps of the world, photographs of ruins, translations of ancient texts, and astronomical charts. The evidence points not to a local anomaly on the Giza Plateau, but to a planetary phenomenon. The inquiry is no longer about one pyramid or even one civilization. It is about a shared memory, a forgotten chapter in the human story that has been preserved in fragmented, coded forms all across the globe. The question that hangs in the air is no longer whether this pattern exists. The question has become, what single global source could have imprinted this precise and extraordinary memory onto the consciousness of our ancient ancestors? And why do our own histories begin only after its trace has almost vanished? To understand the source of this shared memory, we must look again at the records themselves, but with a different lens. We must move past the modern interpretation of gods and read the texts as the ancient scribes wrote them, as administrative accounts. The beings they describe, the ones who ruled for millennia, are not presented as ethereal spirits or abstract principles. They are depicted as individuals with names, titles, and very specific, functional roles. They do not float in a mythological ether. They preside over councils, issue decrees, manage territories, and assign tasks. They are the board of directors for a planetary-scale enterprise. In the Mesopotamian clay tablets, they are the Anunnaki, a term that translates to something like, "those who from heaven to earth came." The texts describe a clear hierarchy. At the top is Anu, the chairman, residing in a celestial abode, whose authority is invoked but rarely seen. On the ground, the operations are managed by two primary figures, the half-brothers Enlil and Enki. Enlil is the commander of the mission, the administrator of the territory, the enforcer of the rules. He is portrayed as stern, disciplined, and concerned with order and the chain of command. He is the governor. Enki, by contrast, is the chief scientist, the head of engineering. His domain is the Earth's resources, the waters, the minerals. He is the master of crafts, the geneticist, the one who solves technical problems. The texts are not poems about their power. They are reports on their jurisdictions. The function of Enki is described with remarkable consistency. He is the one who surveys the land and establishes the first settlements. He is credited with raising the city of Eridu from the swamps. He organizes the world, assigning specific domains to his subordinates. He is the keeper of the Mi, a set of divine decrees or tablets that represent the foundational principles of civilization: kingship, law, craftsmanship, priesthood, writing. These are not magical abilities. They are technologies, social and physical. When humanity is created or modified in these texts, it is Enki who performs the work, depicted as a master artisan in a laboratory, following a specific procedure to create a worker being. His role is not that of a creator god, but of a chief technical officer. Enlil's role is equally functional, but in a different sphere. He is the one who grants kingship to human rulers, an act portrayed as a formal transfer of authority. He is the guardian of the Ekor temple at Nippur, which is described less as a place of worship and more as the central command post, the mooring rope of heaven and earth. His decrees are final. When the Great Flood is decided upon by the council, it is Enlil who enforces the decision, and it is Enki who, in secret, circumvents it by instructing a human to build a submersible vessel. This is not a story of divine caprice. It is a narrative of an internal policy dispute between the head of administration and the head of research and development, with humanity caught in the middle. The hierarchy extends downward. The records speak of the Igigi, a class of lesser Anunnaki who are described as the initial workforce. They are tasked with the hard labor of digging the canals and mining the resources. The texts record their rebellion, a labor strike born of exhaustion. They surround Enlil's command center and refuse to work. The Council of the Anunnaki then convenes to solve this labor problem, and the solution, proposed by Enki, is the creation of a substitute worker, mankind. This is not theology. It is the minutes of a meeting resolving an industrial dispute. The beings who ruled the deep past are presented not as objects of worship, but as a management team dealing with logistical and personnel issues. We must pause here. The dust of the archive seems to settle in a new way. The cuneiform symbols, when read through this functional lens, are transformed. They are no longer the hymns of a primitive religion trying to explain thunderstorms. They are something colder, more structured. They read like a collection of mission logs, personnel files, colonial histories, and technical manuals. The profound strangeness of the Sumerian record is not its mythology, but its persistent, dispassionate, and almost mundane bureaucracy. It is the story of an operation, told from the perspective of the operators, a story so old that by the time it was written down, its true nature had been almost entirely forgotten, preserved only in the cold administrative language of the scribes. This same functional specificity is mirrored in the records of Egypt. The beings of the primordial time, the Neteru, are not a chaotic pantheon. They too have distinct and practical roles. The creator god Ptah, for example, is not a vague, all-powerful deity. His primary title is the Great Artificer. He is the master craftsman, the divine metallurgist, the architect who designs the world and brings it into being by the act of making. His symbols are the builder's tools. He is the patron of engineers and stonemasons. His nature is not metaphysical, it is technical. He is the head of the workshop, the one who executes the design. Beside him stands Thoth, the divine scribe. His function is purely one of information and administration. He is the master of knowledge, the inventor of writing, mathematics, and astronomy. He is the measurer of the earth, the reckoner of the stars, the one who establishes the calendar and the sacred laws. In temple scenes, he is often depicted with his surveying tools. He is not a god of wisdom in an abstract sense. He is the keeper of the archives, the head of the patent office, the chief librarian. The sacred knowledge that formed the basis of Egyptian civilization is said to have originated with him. He is the source of the blueprint, the author of the operating manual for the cosmos. The transition from the rule of the Neteru to the rule of men is also handled in a structured, administrative fashion. After the primary divine dynasty, the Turin Papyrus records the reign of the Shemsu-Hor, Bau, the followers of Horus. This is not a mythical age of heroes. It is presented as a distinct historical period, a long and stable era of custodianship. These Shemsu-Hor appear to be a transitional authority, an order of initiates or a caste of governors who maintained the knowledge and the structure of the state for over 13,000 years before the first mortal pharaoh, Menes, was granted the throne. This is a phased handover of power, a long apprenticeship before the local management was allowed to take control. The human pharaoh, when he finally appears in the records, is not a self-made king. His primary function is to be the earthly link in this unbroken chain of command. He is the son of Ra, the living Horus. But these are not just religious titles, they are job descriptions. His role is to uphold Mut, the cosmic order, the perfect balance and structure that was established at the beginning of time by the Neteru. He is not an innovator, he is a preserver. His legitimacy derives entirely from his place in this lineage, a succession that is traced back, in the official records, through the Shemsu-Hor, directly to the divine administrators who first organized the land. The kingship of Egypt was an inherited franchise. Let us place the two records side by side in the silence. On one side, the clay tablets of Sumer. On the other, the papyri of Egypt. The names are different, the language is different, but the organizational chart is the same. In both cultures, the deep past was governed by a structured group with a clear division of labor. There is a commander-in-chief, a head of science and technology, a master of records and communication, and a subordinate class of workers or custodians. This is not a coincidence of primitive myth-making. This is the signature of a single, organized, and functional system being described by two different cultures. It is the echo of a common administrative structure. We can trace this pattern of functional deities even further. In the Vedic texts of India, the Devas are not simply nature spirits. They are cosmic functionaries with precise roles. Vishvakarman is the All-Maker, the divine architect and engineer of the universe, who forges the celestial cities and the divine weapons. Tvashtar is the master craftsman of the gods, the shaper of forms, the builder of their vehicles. Indra is not just a god of thunder. He is a king, a warrior, the commander of the celestial city, whose primary role is to maintain order against the forces of chaos. The language is more poetic, but the underlying structure of specific, technical, and administrative roles remains deeply embedded in the tradition. The transfer of this knowledge is consistently described as a direct and deliberate process. It is an education, not a mystical revelation. The Sumerian texts speak of the Apkallu, 7 sages who lived before the flood, sent by Enki to teach the arts of civilization to humanity. In Egypt, the wisdom of Thoth is passed down in sacred books. In India, the Vedas are heard by the rishis, a term implying a reception of pre-existing knowledge, not its invention. The memory is not of a slow, human process of trial and error, but of a complete system of knowledge being formally delivered from a higher source to a lower one, a curriculum handed down from teacher to student. This pattern finds its echo across the world in the recurring figure of the civilizing hero. In Mesoamerica, it is Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, who arrives from the sea, bringing knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, agriculture, and architecture. In the Andes, it is Viracocha, who emerges from Lake Titicaca to instruct the people in the arts of civilization after a great flood. These figures are not remembered as conquerors or kings in the human sense. They are remembered as instructors. They arrive, they teach, they establish order, and then they depart, leaving behind a legacy of knowledge and a promise to one day return. Their function is explicitly pedagogical. Notice the profound lack of emotional or psychological depth in the earliest descriptions of these beings. The records are concerned with their titles, their actions, their decrees, and their creations. They are described by what they did, not by what they felt. They are the ultimate pragmatists, the engineers of reality. Their interactions with humanity are almost always hierarchical and functional, that of a designer to a product, a commander to a soldier, a master to an apprentice. The complex mythologies, the tales of love and jealousy, are the patina of later human interpretation, an attempt to make these cold, administrative figures more relatable, more like us. The original memory is of something far more alien and purposeful. The implication of this global pattern is a quiet and fundamental shift in perspective. If the gods of antiquity were not gods at all, but the members of a highly advanced, structured, and ancient organization, then the traces they left behind must be re-evaluated. The great megalithic sites are not just temples for worship. The sacred texts are not just myths. They may be the surviving, degraded artifacts of a global project. The pyramids are not just tombs, they are machines. The king lists are not just legends. They are a memory of a different chain of command. The true history of our world may not be a story of gods and men, but a much stranger story of administrators and their inheritors. A story whose operational details are lost, leaving only the fading echo of a grand and forgotten enterprise. We now turn our attention from the evidence that was recorded to the evidence that is missing. The inquiry must enter a different space, a colder and more difficult terrain defined not by what is there, but by what is not. Here, we confront the true antagonist of this story, an opponent that leaves no monuments and writes no chronicles. Its name is absence. It is the sterile layer of sand between two distinct ages of invention. It is the sudden, inexplicable break in the continuity of the record. It is a silence so profound and so specific that it ceases to be a mere gap in our knowledge and begins to feel like a carefully maintained void, a missing chapter that was not just lost, but removed. This is the shadow that falls between the layers, and its presence is the most unsettling clue of all. Consider the ground beneath the Giza Plateau itself, as revealed by the archaeologist's trench. In the layers preceding the Fourth Dynasty, we find the remains of a simpler culture: pottery, simple tools, and modest mastaba tombs made of mud brick and small, rough-hewn stones. Then, with no surviving transitional forms, no record of failed prototypes or gradual experimentation, the Great Pyramid appears. The leap in engineering, mathematics, and sheer scale is not an evolution. It is a singularity. It is as if a blueprint, fully formed and perfect in its conception, was suddenly inserted into the historical record without a preface. The archaeological layers do not show a learning curve. They show a vertical line, a quantum leap in capability that lacks a documented cause or a developmental history. Imagine the surveyor, kneeling at the bottom of a deep excavation. Below him lies the evidence of the early dynastic period. Above him, the foundations of a structure that seems to belong to a different world. Between them, there is nothing. No school of engineering, no academy of architects, no failed pyramids that collapsed under their own weight, teaching the next generation how to build better. The record in the earth is silent on the most crucial question of all: how the knowledge was acquired. The strata are as distinct as 2 pages from 2 entirely different books, bound together with a blank page in between. The silence is not just an absence of information. It is an absence of the struggle that all human progress requires. This is not a failure of preservation. It is a structural feature of the memory itself. A civilization that could organize the quarrying, transport, and placement of millions of tons of stone was a civilization of meticulous planners and record-keepers. Yet the plan itself, the foundational knowledge that made the entire enterprise possible, is nowhere to be found. The scribe, who recorded the daily allocation of beer, left no record of the geometric proofs required to align the structure to the stars. The administrator, who tracked the movement of every barge from the Tura quarries, left no manual on how to lift a 60-ton granite block 200 feet into the air. The silence is targeted. It is a perfect and complete omission of the intellectual property at the heart of the project. We must widen the lens for a moment. This pattern of a sudden, unexplained technological leap followed by a long period of slow decline is not unique to Giza. It is a recurring echo in the history of megalithic construction across the planet. The earliest works are often the most precise, the most ambitious, the most inexplicable. The later cultures who inherit these sites often struggle to replicate, or even repair, the work of their distant predecessors. History in these specific domains does not appear as a steady upward climb of progress. It appears as the fading echo of a much louder, clearer signal that was broadcast once, in a deep and now silent past. The builders of the later lesser pyramids were not improving on Khufu's design. They were trying and failing to remember it. The knowledge itself seems to have been a fragile inheritance, a system handed down without its underlying theory. The dynastic Egyptians were the masters of the what, but the memory of the why and the how had already begun to recede. We see this in the later Old Kingdom pyramids, which are crude by comparison, their cores filled with rubble, their casings less precise. They are the work of a people following a revered template without fully grasping the science that informed it. The silence, then, is the sound of a tradition losing its source code. It is the sound of a copy, degrading with each generation, until only the ritual remains, stripped of its original profound understanding. This suggests that the true architects were not part of the civilization we are studying. They were a preceding stratum, a layer of knowledge whose physical and textual records have been almost perfectly erased. The Fourth Dynasty was not the dawn. It was the afternoon of a much longer day, a brilliant final application of a science whose morning is lost to us. The silence is the space left behind by these original instructors. It is the empty classroom after the teachers have departed, leaving behind one magnificent final exam paper for their students to complete, a project so vast it would occupy them for a century, ensuring the preservation of the knowledge through the act of its execution. Perhaps this is a moment to simply mark the silence. In the space below, for those who are inclined, note the time where you are and the single word, interval. It is a small, personal record of a shared pause, a quiet acknowledgement of the great, unrecorded intervals of the past. It is a way of touching the void, of giving a name to the antagonist we now face together. An act of shared observation, a vigil kept against the immense and encroaching silence that separates one age of the world from the next. Return to the Giza Plateau and look not at the pyramid, but at the Sphinx. The geological evidence of its erosion, the deep vertical fissures carved into its limestone body, tells a story of water. Not the wind and sand of the historical Sahara, but the heavy, prolonged rainfall of a different climatic era, a greener period in North Africa that ended thousands of years before the reign of Khafra, its supposed builder. The silence here is carved into the very stone of the monument. It is a geological silence, a quiet testimony from the bedrock itself, suggesting that this creature was already ancient, already weathered by millennia of rain, when the first dynastic pharaohs arrived on the scene. The work of the archaeologist confirms this suspicion in a different way. The earliest repair work on the Sphinx is made of massive limestone blocks, identical in style and scale to the temples of the Fourth Dynasty. These are not the blocks of the original construction. They are patches placed over the deeply eroded core body. The physical evidence shows us one civilization, the dynastic Egyptians, conducting a large-scale restoration project on a monument whose origins were already lost to them. They were not its creators. They were its first recorded conservators. They found a ruin, ancient and profound, and sought to preserve it, claiming it as their own while the true story of its creation remained locked in the silent, water-worn stone. This changes the narrative of the entire plateau. It was not a blank canvas upon which Khufu and his descendants built their vision. It was an ancient, sacred landscape that they inherited. Their work was not one of pure creation, but of addition, of building their own monuments in dialogue with the even more ancient structures that were already there. The silence, in this context, becomes a form of reverence. Perhaps they did not record the origins of the Sphinx because they did not know them. To them, it was a being that had always been there, an artifact of the time of the gods, an entity whose history was not meant to be written down, only to be honored. The void in the record is a testament to its perceived antiquity. This pattern of deliberate anonymity is found in the most sophisticated artifacts. Journey inside the Great Pyramid, to the King's Chamber, and observe the granite coffer. It is a masterpiece of precision engineering, cut from a single block of Aswan granite, its interior corners perfectly square, its surfaces flat to within fractions of an inch. Yet it bears no inscription, no name, no prayer, no record of its owner or its purpose. For a civilization obsessed with legacy, with the eternal preservation of the name, this absolute anonymity is the loudest statement possible. It is a functional object, not a personal memorial. Its purpose was so self-evident to its creators that it required no label. Or consider the Serapeum at Saqqara, a subterranean labyrinth of tunnels containing 24 massive granite sarcophagi, each weighing over 70 tons. They are objects of breathtaking precision, their surfaces polished to a mirror sheen, their lids fitting with airtight perfection. Most were found empty, and none bear the name of the sacred bull they were supposedly built to contain. They are anonymous, oversized, and technologically inexplicable. They are another monument to a purpose that has been completely erased from the record, leaving behind only the impossible object itself, a silent testament to a lost science. The silence is not an accident. It feels like a design feature. This recurring anonymity points to a different kind of mind, a different set of priorities. The dynastic Egyptians built for eternity, but it was an eternity of personal legacy, of the name. The builders of these anonymous, precise objects built for a different kind of eternity, the eternity of function. The machine does not need a name. The blueprint does not need a signature. The knowledge itself was the monument. The creators of this system seem to have operated with a perspective that transcended the human desire for individual credit. They were servants of a purpose, of a science, and the purity of that purpose was reflected in the silent, uninscribed perfection of their work. We can feel the presence of this silent antagonist in other ways. In the abandoned quarries, where we find evidence of projects halted mid-completion. The unfinished obelisk at Aswan, a single piece of granite weighing nearly 1,200 tons, lies cracked in its trench, a testament to a project whose ambition exceeded even this culture's remarkable capabilities, or was perhaps interrupted by a sudden loss of knowledge or authority. These sites are the physical embodiment of a broken transmission, the ruins of an interrupted thought. They are the words left unspoken at the end of a final, garbled message. The wind moves through these abandoned places, sweeping dust into the half-finished cuts in the granite. There is a profound sense of stillness here, the feeling of arriving at a workshop moments after the artisans have inexplicably vanished, leaving their tools where they fell. The silence is not empty. It is heavy with the weight of a project left undone, of a sentence that will never be completed. It is the silence of a power cut on a civilizational scale, a sudden darkness that descended, and from which the full light of the original knowledge never returned. This silence, then, is more than just a gap in the timeline. It is an active agent of forgetting. It is a shadow that has fallen over the very origins of high civilization on this planet. It is the invisible wall against which our historical inquiry repeatedly collides. The evidence suggests that a great body of knowledge, a complete and profound science of the Earth and the cosmos, once existed in our deep past. The evidence also shows that the memory of its source, its theory, and its purpose has been subject to a near-total erasure. The layers of stone and the fragments of papyrus tell two different stories. One is a human story of kings and dynasties, of bread and beer, a story we can understand. The other is a story of impossible science and anonymous architects, a story whose beginning has been lost. The true mystery of Giza is not what stands on the plateau, but the immense, silent void that surrounds it, the chasm that separates our known history from an older, far more knowledgeable, and now irretrievably forgotten world. The antagonist has, for now, won. Its monument is the silence itself. The threads now lie on the table, illuminated by a low and patient light. We have seen the stones of Giza, shaped with a precision that defies the tools of its supposed era. We have audited the ledgers of the scribes, both in Egypt and Mesopotamia, and found within their administrative records a memory of an impossible timescale, a dynasty of functional, non-human governors. We have traced the echo of this memory across the globe, from the cosmic cycles of the Vedas, to the silent aligned stones of the Andes. And we have confronted the silence itself, the profound and targeted absence of any record explaining the origin of the foundational knowledge. These are not separate mysteries. They are the scattered but consistent data points of a single unacknowledged event in the history of this planet. They are the fragments of a story we were never meant to read, but can no longer ignore. Look again at the patterns, not as anomalies, but as a coherent system of evidence. The impossible precision of the architecture is the hardware. The embedded mathematical and astronomical constants are the software. The king lists and the global myths of a lost golden age are the corrupted user manuals. The functional roles of the Anunnaki and the Neteru are the faded memory of the original operators. And the great, planetary silence surrounding the source is the final and perhaps most important piece of the design, a security measure, a deliberate firewall separating the users of the system from its creators. When viewed as a whole, it ceases to be a collection of coincidences. It begins to look like the archaeological remains of a single, integrated, and planetary-scale project, whose purpose remains unknown, but whose existence is undeniable. The implication of this coherence is a quiet and fundamental inversion of our entire story. The history of human civilization may not be a story of invention, but one of inheritance. We did not struggle for millennia to slowly discover the principles of mathematics, astronomy, and engineering. We were, perhaps, given them. The great leap forward that marks the dawn of high civilization was not a leap at all. It was the moment a key was turned, activating a pre-existing system. Our oldest cultures, from the Nile to the Indus to the Andes, did not begin from a state of primitive ignorance. They began with a complete and perhaps unearned legacy of knowledge, a curriculum so advanced that its first principles were beyond their comprehension. They were not the authors of their own story. They were the actors, given a script they could follow but not fully understand. This reframes the role of the first human kings and pharaohs. They were not pioneers. They were designated custodians. Their function was not to create a new world, but to maintain an old one, to uphold an order, a mat, that was established long before their time. The rituals of kingship, the elaborate ceremonies, the claim of divine descent, these were not just tools of political control. They were the degraded protocols for interfacing with a system whose true mechanics were already forgotten. The pharaoh was the first caretaker of a magnificent, ancient, and slowly decaying estate, tasked with preserving its forms, even as the memory of its original purpose faded into the silence of the generations. He was the manager of a franchise whose parent company had long since vanished. We are forced to consider that our history is not the whole history. Beneath the recorded strata of our civilizations, the empires, the wars, the slow march of progress, there lies another layer, a ghost stratum. This layer is not human. It is the footprint of the others, the functional intelligence that surveyed the planet, established the initial framework, and then, for reasons we cannot fathom, receded from view. They were not gods to be worshipped, but something far more potent and far more unsettling, a preceding administration. The memory of their presence has been the driving, unconscious force behind our greatest myths, our oldest religions, and our most inexplicable architectural achievements. We have been living inside their abandoned workshop, mistaking their tools for objects of worship. This is a profound and uncomfortable thought. It suggests that the very foundations of our world are not our own. It casts humanity not as the protagonist of a planetary drama, but as a secondary character, a species that came of age in a world that had already been designed, measured, and organized according to a logic that was not its own. The great sacred sites of the world may not be our first attempts to reach for the heavens. They may be the last remaining terminals of a network that has long since gone silent. They are monuments not to our own dawning consciousness, but to a consciousness so ancient and so complete that its memory survives only as a silent echo in stone and a confused whisper in our oldest texts. The silence, in this light, becomes an act of profound and deliberate separation. The erasure of the source was not an accident of time. It was the final instruction in the operating manual. The knowledge was to be given, but the memory of the givers was to be removed. Why? Was it a form of protection, to prevent a premature humanity from seeking out a power it could not control? Was it a non-interference directive, executed at the end of a long and forgotten mission? Or was it simply the inevitable consequence of a transfer between two entirely different orders of being? A handoff so profound that the memory of the transaction could not be preserved in the limited storage of human culture. The void is not empty. It is a message in itself, a final clear statement of departure. We have followed these threads from the dust of Giza to the archives of Sumer, from the star charts of the heavens to the silence of the bedrock itself. The path of this inquiry, however, does not lead to a final destination, but to a wider and more disquieting field of observation. The patterns only grow deeper, and the silence more articulate. For those who choose to continue this vigil, the journey is not one of finding answers, but of returning to the question, again and again, each time with a greater appreciation for its true and unsettling scale. Acknowledging this is the next step in the process. If this is the case, then we are a species with a profound and foundational amnesia. We are like a child raised in a great and ancient house, who believes his family built it, unaware that it has stood for millennia and that his ancestors were merely the latest in a long line of tenants. He learns to use the rooms, he keeps the lights on, he maintains the gardens, but he has no idea of the architect's original plan, nor of the true purpose of the strange and silent machinery he sometimes finds in the deepest cellars. Our histories are the stories we have told ourselves to make sense of this strange and magnificent inheritance, fictions created to fill the void left by a forgotten truth. The scale of this forgotten truth is almost too large to hold in the mind. It suggests that the last 10,000 years of human history, the period we consider to be the entirety of our civilized existence, is but the final, fading chapter of a much older and grander narrative. The true story of this planet may have been written in the deep past, in the era of the impossibly long reigns and the functional gods. What we call history may simply be the long, slow process of forgetting that story. We are not at the dawn of civilization. We may be at its twilight, living among the luminous ruins of a day whose sun has already set. This changes our relationship with the past. The ancient world is no longer a simpler, more primitive version of ourselves. It becomes the repository of a fragmented but superior knowledge. The work of the archaeologist is no longer to unearth the slow evolution of man, but to recover the faint, dying signals of a different kind of intelligence. The myths are not fantasies. They are corrupted data files. The ruins are not just stones. They are dormant technologies. The entire human past becomes an immense and largely undeciphered crime scene. And the crime is not a murder, but a memory wipe, an act of forgetting so complete that we have forgotten. The implications ripple outward, touching everything. Our understanding of consciousness, of technology, of our place in the cosmos, is all predicated on the belief that we are the first and only high intelligence to arise on this planet. If that premise is wrong, then everything built upon it is called into question. We are not alone in our own history. We are haunted by the ghost of a superior science, a ghost that whispers in the mathematics of the pyramids, in the alignments of the temples, and in the impossible numbers of the scribes' ledgers. The mystery of Giza is not about a lost civilization in the human sense. It is about the lingering evidence of a lost paradigm of reality itself. This leaves us in a state of profound uncertainty, which may be the only honest intellectual position. We are confronted with a body of evidence that our current historical model cannot explain. The evidence suggests a past that is radically different, vastly older, and far more technologically sophisticated than we are prepared to accept. To ignore this evidence is to remain willfully blind. To accept its implications is to abandon the very foundations of our modern identity. We are standing on a conceptual shoreline, with the comfortable, well-mapped territory of recorded history behind us, and a vast, dark, and uncharted ocean of deep time stretching out before us. The Giza Plateau, under the cold light of the stars, becomes the emblem of this choice. It is the ultimate boundary object. We can see it as the pinnacle of a familiar human story, a monument to a king's ambition. That is the safe harbor. Or we can see it as it appears in the silence of this long night, as a signpost, a marker left on the shore of our known world, pointing out toward that dark and silent ocean. It is a message in a bottle, a testament to a history so vast and so strange that its recovery would not just rewrite our books, it would transform our understanding of what it means to be human. The inquiry has reached its edge. We have followed the evidence as far as the records will allow, to the very limit of the light. Beyond this point lies only the silence and the immense, unanswered question that the stones themselves continue to ask. The scale of the mystery is now larger than the structures themselves, larger than the civilization that tended to them, larger even than the history that has been lost. The mystery, in the end, is about the true age and nature of intelligence on this planet, a story whose beginning is missing and whose end is not yet written. The wind moves across the stones, the same wind that has blown for 10,000 nights. It carries no answers, only the fine, abrasive dust of the ages. The stars pivot around the pyramid's dark apex, indifferent, silent. They have kept this watch for a very long time. They have seen the first surveyors arrive. They have seen the last stone set in place. And they have seen the generations of inheritors come and go, each one looking up and wondering, each one feeling the silent gravitational pull of a past they can sense, but cannot remember. The vigil continues. The night has deepened. The arguments and the evidence, the timelines and the translations, all seem to recede, absorbed back into the immense quiet of the plateau. We are left where we began, under the slow wheeling of the stars, in the presence of a silence that has outlasted every dynasty and every attempt to explain it. The air is thin and cold. The great stone structures before us are no longer data points in an investigation. They have returned to their original state, which is simply to be. They are facts of the landscape, as elemental as the bedrock from which they rise and the constellations to which they seem to answer. The time for connecting threads is over. Now is the time for observation. The wind has fallen. In its absence, a different kind of sound emerges, the deep, internal hum of a place saturated with time. It is the sound of stillness itself, a frequency that seems to emanate from the stones. They have held their position for thousands of years, bearing the heat of the day and the cold of the night, unmoved. They have witnessed the slow drift of the celestial pole, the rise and fall of civilizations on the riverbank below, the changing of the very climate of the world around them. Their patience is a physical quality, a form of energy stored within their crystalline structure. To be here now is to feel the edge of that patience, to understand that the inquiry is not ours to command. We are merely visitors in its long, slow unfolding. Look at the horizon to the east, a faint, almost imperceptible lightening of the absolute dark. It is the first hint of the coming dawn, a promise of light that has not yet arrived. In this suspended moment, between the dominion of the stars and the dominion of the sun, the world holds its breath. The pyramids are at their most inscrutable, their sharp geometries softened into pure presence, their color lost to the monochrome of the deep twilight. They seem to belong to this moment, to this boundary between night and day, between one age and the next. They are objects of the threshold, guardians of a gate we can no longer see. The questions we brought here with us seem small, temporary, against the scale of this daily, cosmic transition. The light grows, not as a beam, but as a slow infusion, a change in the quality of the darkness itself. It is a cold, gray light, the color of ash and memory. It catches the highest point of the great structure first, a single, luminous capstone that is no longer there, but whose presence is still implied by the perfect convergence of the lines. For a moment it seems to hang there, a point of fire in the sky, a beacon lit by a star that is still below the edge of the world. It is the first word in a sentence that will soon be spoken by the sun, illuminating the vast and silent page of the desert floor. The memory of the form precedes the arrival of the light that will reveal it. Now the light washes down the immense faces of the stone, and a detail, lost to the night, emerges. It is a single joint, high up on the eastern face, between two of the few remaining casing stones. They are not the rough core blocks, but the fine, white limestone from Tura, polished to a gleam that would have once made this entire structure blaze like a captured star. The joint between them is a line of shadow so fine it seems to have been drawn with a razor. It is a line of impossible perfection, a place where two surfaces, each weighing several tons, meet with a precision that allows no room for error, no space for the dust of the intervening millennia to settle. This single silent detail is what remains when all the theories have been exhausted. It is a fact, irreducible and profound. It is the signature of a mind, the mark of a hand, the result of a technology that we cannot replicate and a purpose that we cannot name. It does not speak of a king's glory or a nation's power. It speaks of a different value system entirely. It speaks of a dedication to precision that borders on the fanatical, a commitment to an ideal of order and perfection that seems to be an end in itself. It is a quiet statement of a capability so complete, so assured, that it required no other monument. The evidence is in the work itself, and the work is silent. The sun has now cleared the horizon. The shadows are long and sharp, stretching out across the sand. The heat of the day has not yet begun, but the moment of nocturnal contemplation is over. The plateau will soon awaken to the noise of another day, another generation of visitors who will come to stand before these structures and feel a sense of wonder. They will be told the story of the kings, of the builders, of a great Bronze Age civilization reaching for eternity. It is a good story. It is a human story. It is a story that fits within the comfortable confines of our known history. It is a story that allows the deeper, colder silence to remain undisturbed. But for those who have kept this vigil, the silence is no longer empty. It is resonant. It is filled with the weight of the questions that the stones themselves now seem to ask. The official story is a screen, a necessary and perhaps benevolent fiction, placed over a truth so large and so strange that it might be unbearable. We have not been learning something new. We have been participating in an act of remembering, trying to piece together the fragments of a memory that is not our own, a memory that was left here, encoded in stone and alignment, waiting for a time when we might be ready to receive it. The journey does not end with an answer. It dissolves into a deeper state of inquiry. The pyramid is not a solution to a historical problem. It is a permanent and physical question. Who are we? Where did our knowledge truly come from? What is the full scope of this planet's history? The structure offers no reply. Its function is not to provide an answer, but to ensure that the question itself is never lost, that it will endure through the long ages of our civilizational amnesia, waiting patiently to be asked again. It is the anchor of a forgotten memory, holding fast against the current of time. We are left with this feeling, this resonance. It is the sense of having stood on the shore of a vast ocean and seen the faint light of a distant unknown continent. We do not know what lies there, what forgotten cities or lost histories it may hold. We know only that the ocean is real, and that the map of our world, which we believed to be complete, is not. The existence of that distant shore changes everything. It reframes our own small island of recorded history, turning it from the whole world into a mere province, a single outpost on the edge of a much larger and far older reality. The work of the scribe is done. The measurements of the researcher are recorded. The voice of the curator now falls silent. What remains is the object itself, in the clear and unforgiving light of the morning. It holds its secrets with a patience that we can only begin to comprehend. It does not need our belief. It does not require our understanding. It asks only for our attention, for a quiet and sustained observation, free from the noise of our own assumptions. It is a mirror reflecting not the past, but the limits of our own present knowledge. The sun climbs higher. The stones begin to warm. The shadow of the great monument shrinks back toward its base. Another day has begun on the Giza Plateau, a day like 10,000 others before it. The mystery does not yield. It simply endures, waiting. It is a part of the landscape now, a feature of our world. It is the quiet, persistent, and undeniable evidence of a chapter in our own story that we have yet to learn how to read. The final act is not ours. It belongs to the silence that follows. The silence where the true weight of the inquiry settles, not as a conclusion, but as a permanent state of wonder. The camera holds on that single, perfect joint between the casing stones, a line of shadow against the bright, ancient limestone. It is a testament. It is a legacy. It is the last, and perhaps the only clear word from a world that has otherwise vanished completely. We do not turn away with an answer. We turn away with a deeper sense of the question. The inquiry has not been closed. It has been opened, in a way that can never again be sealed. The past is not behind us. It is beneath us, a vast and silent foundation upon which our entire world is built. And its memory is waiting, not in a lost book or a hidden tomb, but here, in the open air, in the light of the sun, in the silent geometric perfection of the stone.